Blake and fellow AP students. Today I'm broadcasting live from a facility just outside of Syria, bringing you the culture, history, and reasons behind more of this ancient civilization. After a year of closely analyzing the situation within Syria, it has been brought to my attention that the history of Syria is not commonly discussed, only the modern-day war. So today we'll be learning about the history, then followed by a special news broadcaster discussing the concept of war, and finally a major solution that could probably end this war. I am Rosa Ortega. Stay tuned for more. Syrian history could be dated back hundreds of years, and in order to understand the war from today, one must travel to the past and discover the culture difference of this ancient civilization. The great city of Aleppo, Syria, was once a prospering and dominant location for the merchants back when the Silk Road was intact. Since the ancient past, many cities of Syria have prospered and created wonderful vacational sites, but having such great wealth did cause problems with the neighboring countries, many of which wanted to take the wealth of Syria into their own hands. Throughout the Roman world, Syria was part of their great domain, so it is only natural that throughout the wealth and power, many of the structures represented the great Roman culture. Since the Civil War began, the culture found deep within Syria has begun taking a default, having temples and great structures formed back as far as 32 AD collapse from modern-day weapons and attacks. What had once taken ancient civilizations years upon years to create is now being destroyed within seconds. Damascus, the capital of Syria, is known to be the oldest continuous lived-in city of the world, which just means that no matter what, it has prospered. It was originally founded in 3rd millennium BC, consisting as one of the oldest cities in the world and containing more than 125 monuments from all over distinct periods and times. Mark Twain once stated in The Innocent Abroad from 1869 that no record event has occurred in the world but Damascus was in the existing to receive the news of it. Go back as far as you will into the vague past, there was always a Damascus. She has looked upon the dry bones of 1,000 empires and will live to see the tomb of 1,000 more before she dies. The Greeks first came up with the name Syria to describe an area of varying size and boundaries. Next up, we have a special news broadcast brought to you by Vox Media.
Syria's war is a mess. After 6 years, the conflict is divided between 4 sides, each side with foreign backers, and those foreign backers don't even agree with each other on who they're fighting for and who they're fighting against. And now, Syria's use of chemical weapons has provoked President Donald Trump to directly attack Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. This is a major development because up until now, the US has only been focused on fighting ISIS. To understand the crisscrossing interventions and battle lines in Syria today and how it got this way, it helps to go back to the beginning of the conflict and watch to see how it unfolded. The first shots in the war were fired in March 2011 by Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad against peaceful Arab Spring demonstrators. In July, the protesters start shooting back, and some Syrian troops even defect from the Syrian army to join them. They call themselves the Free Syrian Army, and the uprising becomes a civil war. Extremists from around the region and the world start traveling to Syria to join the rebels. Now, Assad actually encourages this by releasing jihadist prisoners to tinge the rebellion with extremism and make it harder for foreign backers to support them. In January 2012, Al-Qaeda forms a new branch in Syria, Jabhat al-Nusra. Also around that time, Syrian Kurdish groups who had long sought autonomy take up arms and informally secede from Assad's rule in the north. That summer is when Syria becomes a proxy war. Iran, Assad's most important ally, intervenes on his behalf. And by the end of 2012, Iran is sending daily cargo flights and has hundreds of officers on the ground. At the same time, the oil-rich Arab states in the Persian Gulf begin sending money and weapons to the rebels, mainly to counter Iran's influence. Iran steps up its influence in turn in mid-2012 when Hezbollah, a Lebanese militia backed by Iran, invades to fight along Assad. In turn, the Gulf states respond, Saudi Arabia really stepping up this time to send more money and weapons to the rebels, this time through Jordan, who also opposes Assad. By 2013, the Middle East is divided between mostly Sunni powers generally supporting the rebels and Shias generally supporting Assad. That April, the Obama administration, horrified by Assad's atrocities and the mounting death toll, signs a secret order authorizing the CIA to train and equip Syrian rebels. But the program stalls. At the same time, the US quietly urges Arab Gulf states to stop funding extremists, but their requests basically go ignored. In August, the Assad regime uses chemical weapons against civilians, provoking condemnation from around the world.
Men, women, children lying in rows, killed by poison gas. It is in the national security interests of the United States to respond to the Assad regime's use of chemical weapons through a targeted military strike.
Russia proposed on Monday that Syria surrender control over its chemical weapons to the international community for its eventual dismantling to avoid a U.S. military strike.
The US ends up backing down, but the whole thing establishes Syria as a great powers dispute, with Russia backing Assad and the US opposing him. Just weeks later, the first American CIA training and arms reached Syrian rebels. The US is now a participant in the war. In February 2014, something happens that transforms the war. An Al-Qaeda affiliate based mostly in Iraq breaks away from the group over internal disagreements. The group calls itself the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, and it becomes Al-Qaeda's enemy. ISIS mostly fights not Assad, but other rebels and Kurds, carving out a mini-state it calls its caliphate. That summer, it marches across Iraq, seizing territory and galvanizing the world against it. In September, 1 year after US almost bombed Assad, it begins bombing ISIS.
We're moving ahead with our campaign of airstrikes against these terrorists, and we're prepared to take action against ISIL in Syria as well.
That summer, in July, the Pentagon launches its own program to train Syrian rebels, but will only train those who will fight ISIS, not Assad. The program fizzles, showing that America now opposes ISIS more than Assad, but that there's also no like-minded Syrian proxy forces on the ground in Syria. In August, Turkey starts bombing Kurdish groups in Iraq and in Turkey, even as these Kurdish groups are fighting ISIS in Syria. But Turkey doesn't bomb ISIS. This gets to one of the big problems in this conflict. The US sees ISIS as its main enemy, but the US's allies like Turkey and a lot of Middle Eastern states have other priorities. This makes for a lot of unclear and confusing alliances. The next month, in September, Russia intervenes on behalf of Assad, sending a few dozen military aircraft to a long-held Russian base in the country. Russia says it's there to bomb ISIS, but in fact only ends up bombing anti-Assad rebels, including some backed by the US. The next year, Donald Trump wins the White House, vowing to stay out of Syria and signaling that Assad should be able to stay in power. At the end of 2016, Assad, helped by Russian air power and Iranian-sponsored militias, retakes the Syrian city of Aleppo, knocking the rebels out of their last remaining urban stronghold. Then, in spring 2017, Assad once again uses chemical weapons against his people, killing 85, including 20 children. Back in the US, Trump says his attitude towards Syria and Assad has, quote, changed very much due to the attacks. He vows to respond, and within just a few days, the White House launches dozens of Tomahawk missiles that strike an airbase in Syria. This is the first time the United States has directly attacked the Assad regime, and this adds yet another crisscrossing complication to the already multi-dimensional civil war. So as it stands now, Syria is in ruins.
On the last discussion of today, we will be talking about the two major powers, America and Russia, and how they could align together and overthrow ISIS and the dictator Assad. leaving the civilians unharmed and able to express their natural freedom. This situation seems far-fetched, but it could be possible, and it could mean freedom for all. This news presentation has been brought to you by Metro Tech.